Hi, I'm Ken Howard, and welcome to the Gay Therapy LA podcast. Today, I want to talk about gay men and coping with bad luck. This year, 2022, marks my 30th year as a gay men's specialist psychotherapist. I'm also an AASECT, the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, certified sex therapist, and a life, career, executive, and relationship coach for men in Los Angeles or West Hollywood, California, where I live, or all over the United States and the world. And one of the things I've noticed in working with so many guys on various issues and challenges in their lives is that occasionally people just run into bad luck. It's not their mistake. It's not their own failures in judgment. It's not their neuroses or diagnosable psychiatric conditions. It's just plain bad luck. And some incidents set them back, cause them stress, frustrate them, or degrade their quality of life for a short time, for a long time, or even permanently. So what do we do about these? Well, my clients in Alcoholics Anonymous like to recite the phrase about the serenity to accept the things you cannot change, the courage to change the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I've written about that before on gaytherapyla.com in a blog, and I think we might even did a previous podcast episode on that, because there's a lot of elements to that: the courage, the serenity, and the wisdom. And when it comes to things that happen to you that are just bad luck through really no fault of your own, it does take serenity to accept those. But as Jack Canfield, author of a great and inspirational book called The Success Principles, says, event plus response equals outcome. You might not be able to change the event that has happened to you, but you certainly can influence your response to it, and that can affect the ultimate outcome. Donald Michael Baum, PhD, is a psychotherapist whom I've seen lecture at various psychotherapy conferences, and he's an expert on the concept of resilience, which is often seen as the ability to endure, withstand, and overcome challenges in your life. Resilience is one of the most important character traits that a person can cultivate in themselves, and I've written about that too, because I think it's so important no matter who you are or what kind of challenges you face. Resilience. Clinical social workers like me believe that for every stressor in life, there is an equal and opposite resource or coping strategy, or often more than one. It's like the idea that for every poison there is an antidote. So when we are hit with whatever incident that is just plain bad luck, it's up to us to identify, evaluate, and implement our adaptive coping strategies to make it better. We can do things. We can change the way we think. We can identify specific behaviors to take on our own behalf. We can fight back with the tools that comprise our ability to overcome and restore equilibrium, before the bad luck incident took it away. And it's like, girl, get yourself together. And that's what we need to do. Let's take some examples, and I'll give you a possible coping strategy or a way of looking at each one. And then from these examples, see if you can apply the what is my adaptive coping strategy for this model to every time you face a situation that is plain dumb luck. So number one, let's talk about the big one, the COVID-19 pandemic. This has been a stroke of bad luck for all of global humanity in the last few years. The deaths, chronic or acute illness, overall loss from the disease and its many variants, and the resulting disaster of misinformation, politicization, and disruption has been overwhelming on a huge scale. It's just bad luck that we've had to endure this in 2020 and 2021 and 2022 and counting. So, what's the coping strategy? Well, coping with a global pandemic reminds me of the old adage, think globally, act locally. That means that world leaders, from politicians to medical professionals and scientists and public health leaders, will need to guide everyone on how to best cope with widespread disease. That's what our elected officials and people who have been elevated to the level of expert status, that's their job. They make the big bucks. Here in LA County, the head of public health makes $455,000 a year. That's a big salary for anywhere, even in LA. But when it comes down to ourselves, we need to identify what works for each of us as individuals, couples, families. And local public health restrictions dictate things like mask wearing or social distancing and all that. But our own individual coping means that we try as hard as we can to live our lives just as we would without the pandemic, but just with some exceptions, some workarounds to keep ourselves safe. We might need to learn to work from home, or if we can't do that, learn to wear protective gear as long as public health officials require that. We might need to balance when we work versus when we rest if we're sick, or if we need to take care of a loved one who's sick, and balance the time that we devote to each demand. We can identify where the nearest vaccine distributors are, which could be a medical professional's office or a pharmacy, a government facility, a school, our employer, or even a commercial drugstore. We can also cope in the hope that we believe the acute restrictions and disruptions are time limited. Using another old adage about coping, the only way out of this is to go through this. Gay men in particular are especially prepared for COVID coping if we're old enough to have lived through the height of the HIV/AIDS crisis. And getting a vaccine is no more complicated, even less, than getting a monthly PrEP refill. So back then we were aware of the global implications of disease, but it came down to individual communities and even ourselves to develop safety and self-care plans, even if we were, just like now, swirling in misinformation, conflicting information, and the politicization of public health messages. Those who can remember when public health gave warnings, oh boy, about super infection, more than one strain of HIV combining into a super strain that would bring sudden death. Yeah, that never happened. That was a public health major error that they never apologized for. Or remember that moron in Los Angeles who shall remain nameless most of the time, but not here, Michael Weinstein of AIDS Healthcare Foundation, who dismissed PrEP upon its arrival as merely a party drug. And yet PrEP has been incredibly useful in reducing the prevalence of HIV, and it's been a really important part of gay men's health and self-care for years now. So just like today, back then with HIV/AIDS, we had Republicans in America who did their very best to make the situation worse, not better, through very arrogant posturing, misinformation, self-serving politics, moralism, shrill paranoia, and judgmentalism that did absolutely nothing to help the situation of those who were vulnerable to the disease. And I promised the friends I lost to keep the memory of the injustice they went through alive. And that's part of my commitment to activism today. I'm not just a clinician. I'm also an activist, and I'm proud of that. Because that's my part of coping with HIV and AIDS long term. It's 32 years this year for me, living with HIV, but unlike a lot of my friends, surviving. And it's part of my coping with COVID, to remind people of what's sound and what's non-science malarkey, because we went through a lot of that with the AIDS crisis, and now we're going through it again with COVID. So coping with the pandemic means taking care of ourselves, but also taking care of others by being critical consumers of sometimes conflicting information and applying a lot of critical thinking to what we see and hear and observe, and relying, just like we did on HIV, on the science and just time to sort it all out. So the next one, bad luck, well, just any other kind of illness. Sure, there's COVID-19, but we might have bad luck in getting a sudden, but hopefully short-lived, food poisoning, an allergic reaction, a head cold, a temporary injury like a sprain or a broken bone. I've heard about various skiing injuries this week from my clients who attended Gay Ski Week in Aspen, or even an STI, a sexually transmitted infection that forces us to take a brief break from sexual content until successful treatment can take effect. Sexual contact, not content. We can consume all the porn we want alone by ourselves, but contact might have to wait until we're not infectious. So illness is nature's way of pressing pause on our lives, or it's like calling a timeout in a ball game. It gives us a chance to kind of rest and reflect, even when we don't want it, even when illness is an inconvenience or bad luck that is foisted upon us. It's also a time that we can kind of press pause and just kind of keep things in perspective for a little bit. Some illnesses just need us to wait it out with rest and fluids and watching Netflix or something, while other situations require intervention from a medical professional, a doctor or a nurse practitioner, to get a specific prescription or put a broken limb in a cast or wear some kind of support device or use some kind of an aid like a cane or a leg scooter or a walker. It might even require a sling, but not the fun kind you might be thinking about. While illness is an inconvenient incident of bad luck that's unpredictable, it can also be a signal that we need to take better care of ourselves. We need to slow down and shift our focus from being productive all the time in the world to retreating for a bit and just practicing some self-pampering. And try to think of brief illness despite unpleasant symptoms as what some have called the gift in dirty wrapping paper from nature. To take a pause, rededicate ourselves to appreciating our health, reminding us of how important it is and not taking it for granted, and keeping our values and priorities in perspective. It can also make us more compassionate to those for whom illness and symptoms are not transient. And we must commit to doing what we can for them, including voting for politicians who support government disability benefits or disabled access to public buildings, or having job and education programs that support persons with all kinds of conditions and disabilities so that they can participate in society as much as they can. I've worked with a lot of people on this when I worked in the nonprofit world. And, illnesses and conditions can affect all of us. And even if we're not the ones with the condition, our fellow humankind is. So we need to kind of be there for them the way people from many walks of life were there for AIDS patients at the height of the pandemic, particularly lesbian nurses who never got the credit that they really deserve for being courageous enough to touch AIDS patients when no one else would. We owe our sisters who are lesbians a real debt of gratitude for that. And there were straight women also, and plenty of straight men, especially physicians. But, sometimes we have to cope with a disability or an illness, and sometimes we have to support those who support us, and sometimes we just need to support the person who's going through something that maybe we never will, but we could have a role in supporting somebody else. That's just a good thing to do. Number 3, another piece of bad luck, just crime. While hopefully rare, many gay men that I work with as clients have at least some point in their lives been the victims of crime, either a theft or a burglary or a violent crime, like experiencing bullying, gay bashing, sexual assault, physical attacks in public, or domestic violence. These aren't as much bad luck that just happens as they are traumatizing life experiences, but we could consider maybe petty theft, such as like a smash and grab theft from our car, or being pickpocketed, which can be common at gay male sex club or bars or bathhouses, as bad luck incidents that are annoying and distressing, but not dangerous to our person. So what is the coping strategy when we're victims of crime? So while gay men historically I grant you, very frequently met with sarcasm or even open hostility from police officers, some can be valiant, public servants, and really want to help us by investigating and apprehending a perpetrator. But for petty crimes, most police agencies worldwide, they just don't have the time to pursue petty theft crimes. We cope by acknowledging the loss, securing ourselves and our belongings, such as reporting credit cards as stolen to their respective banks, maybe developing new self-protective measures for the future, such as guarding our wallets better or not keeping valuables on a car seat. And while even petty crimes can cause trauma, I've worked with guys on this where they were robbed or lost something important, and it is traumatizing. Even if there's violence or even threats of violence involved, we cope with trauma by reclaiming. I always say reclaiming is the number one word in trauma. Reclaiming our lives in the name of healing and restoring confidence that our lives can be put back together again. We're not going to let the perpetrator rob us of our sense of confidence or our sense of security. We're not going to give that perpetrator that much power. We can also cognitively reframe by replacing thoughts that our perpetrator was a self-indulgent, greedy, narcissistic, sociopathic clod to perhaps understanding that maybe we were burglarizers, had something stolen by a homeless person who has resorted to stealing from others merely to survive. And this might be, a little too Pollyanna, kind of too generous a thought, because, perpetrators never have the right to steal from us. But I find this cognitive reframe a certain cold comfort when these things have happened to me. And maybe if I really knew the circumstances of this person's actions, I might be able to, I'm never going to approve of it, but I might understand it in a broader context. And that can help take some of the sting out of it. If you watch the TV show from NBC, This Is Us, they did a storyline about someone who was frightened from a robbery and yet learned that the person was very mentally ill. And that kind of changed the perspective. NBC owes me a fee for plugging their show there. But good television and good movies can sometimes inspire us to think a little differently. And it can even be enlightening in addition to being entertaining. So number 4, piece of bad luck, is lost opportunity at work. We've all probably had the bad luck to be severely disappointed by something that happened at work. We didn't get a promotion that by rights we should have had, and it went to some straight guy who was in good with a homophobic boss. How many of us have seen that, right? Maybe we were the victims of other discrimination, such as race or ethnicity or religion, appearance privilege. I did a blog article in a previous episode on what that is and how to deal with it, or even gender. I was severely discriminated against as the only male in an all-female office at a nonprofit organization once. And while that's rare, even though it was rare, when it happens to you, it's not fun. So while these actions are, in most settings illegal, they still happen, and they're not really enforced, despite politically expedient governmental promises that they are. We can also see office politics at play, where someone gets a work opportunity that they got for any other reason other than their own skill set and qualifications. It's just patently unfair. So what's our coping strategy? If we continually miss out on work opportunities, it could mean that we need to improve our overall candidacy, such as building our skill set, technically, networking socially more effectively, eliminating any work deficits or bad habits, even improving our appearance and presentation image. That shouldn't make a difference, but it does, and then what do we do with that? I coach guys all over the world on this, and I really believe in executive and professional coaching in every field and at every level, from the beginning to the executive. But what if we are just in a bad work environment where bad luck turns into a pattern of being overlooked and constant FOMO, fear of missing out, then we might need to change our luck by moving to a different work environment with a better goodness of fit, which sometimes can mean an environment that's more friendly to people who are both gay and male. There's a saying that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. So we can be eminently prepared through our education and skill set and experience, but we also need to be given opportunities by others who are in a position to support us trying new things to grow. Somebody has to give us the opportunity to do some kind of work activity that we've never done before, and then we get to add that to our list of skills and abilities. We have to be committed to our own personal version of what's called in organizations continuous quality improvement, CQI. I used to do this when I was a nonprofit organization executive. You try new things, you evaluate them, you make changes in your organization based on those evaluations, and then you try new things again. It might feel frustrating because if you take on this philosophy, you feel like you're never there, you've never really arrived, you're never done and perfected. But it's also fun because you're always striving. Have you ever seen an Olympic medal-winning athlete? What's the one thing they're going to do tomorrow? They're going to practice and get even better. So number 5 is bad luck and losses in love. Since romantic relationships are an interpersonal experience, bad luck in relationships is not something passive because we all influence every interpersonal relationship that we have because we are always 50% of it or even more. In the case of polyamory, we're 33 1/3 of it. But losses in love can feel like bad luck when our timing is off, such as when we want to try and reconcile with a previous partner. I have a previous blog episode on getting back with an ex and the case for and against doing that. Maybe we want to get back together with them, but they've already moved on to be with somebody else. Or maybe we want to move and relocate. There's a previous episode on that. But we don't get the job we wanted to be with our new partner in a new city for. Or sometimes we do our best in relationships and we get unceremoniously dumped, even ghosted. There's a previous episode on gay men and ghosting. And sometimes we never get to know why they left in the first place. We'd like to have an answer to our questions. We'd like to have an explanation. We'd like to have a justification. And sometimes we just never get it. So what's our coping for the bad luck and losses in love? Well, what we call in dialectical behavioral therapy, which was invented by Marsha Linehan. I like to give credit like that. Marsha Linehan was a smart lady. I think she's still around. But she developed dialectical behavioral therapy as a form of psychotherapy. I use parts of it, which we're not really supposed to do. But I use parts of it, but there are clinics that have, a very elaborate DBT program. But there's an element that we call radical acceptance. Radical acceptance. And that's often captured in the old phrase, it is what it is. I mean, we don't have control over others' thinking and behavior, but we do have to accept it unless, like we said before, we're fighting against a crime. Other people have the right to leave us in relationships for any reason, including no stated reason at all. It's not illegal. It's the same with employment in at-will employment states. And to cope, we just fall back, regroup, pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and start all over again, as the old show tune says. And I think trusting in fate. If we're in a relationship and something goes wrong, then it wasn't meant to be. Because life, fate, whatever, has something or someone better in store for us. I've experienced myself, and while it can be tough in the short term, when you meet the right person, you understand why all the others never worked out. It all makes sense. And that's how you know you've met the right person, and that's how you know you can make a commitment to them with confidence, because you understand who that person is in the context of all the clowns who've come before. Number 6 is bad luck and technical problems. Man, I hate these. In our highly technological age, we rely a lot on machines and electronics and other sophisticated automated systems. And all of these systems, for various reasons, can occasionally break. You're working on an important work project and the power goes out. You're working on something else and your computer freezes and you lose data. You're in an important online meeting and the Wi-Fi goes out. Or you lose your connection maybe for a few minutes and maybe for the rest of the day. The worst thing about relying on anything electronic or mechanical is that these things do not work 100% of the time. We don't live in an age yet where everything works 100% of the time. And when they decide to break, it's never at a convenient time. Because when would be a convenient time for something to break? I don't know that exists. So what's our coping for this? We cope with technical errors on equipment that we rely on, or delays due to mechanical problems, like a plane we were going to fly in, or our car breaking down on our way to an important destination, all by accepting, that word again, that sometimes life doesn't go the way we planned. And we have to make that okay. We might use things like backing up an important work presentation on a flash drive, or maybe carrying an extra laptop battery or cell phone charger. But everyone everywhere has to make a collective decision that if we're going to rely this much on machines, we have to give each other some slack for the times those machines don't work. People in past ages got by remarkably well with very little technology, and they managed to live. And once in a while, we can too. Let's look at multiple losses in a row. This is the 7th and final stroke of bad luck that plenty of people I've worked with have experienced. But I'm thinking of one person in particular who described to me many losses right in a row. And these can be especially hard times in life. Just last year, I was feeling the stress of a virulently anti-gay Trump administration, feeling the stress of the COVID pandemic, and dealing with an anti-gay stalker making gruesome threats to me. And that paled in comparison to this other guy's experiences. I've known him well and for a long time, and his losses were no fault of his own and out of his control. And they involved family and friends and work and health and finances, and it can feel like all these various entities are somehow conspiring and saying, I know, how can we really fuck with so-and-so today? But that doesn't really exist. There is no cabal. There is no conspiracy. So there were all these losses caused by independent variables, but the common denominator was this one guy. So what's our coping strategy when it feels like life is ganging up on us? These kinds of clusterfucks were not made overnight despite their quick succession, and they aren't solved or mitigated overnight either. We need to take each accumulated stressor on its own and mobilize our coping strategies, both for each loss or each stressor, and for the fact that we get weary from having to deal with so many at once. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I did a presentation for nonprofits years ago about managing multiple priorities, or clients who are dealing with multiple stressors around their health, maybe a substance problem, maybe a financial problem, maybe HIV, maybe homelessness, all at once. And helpers like me, like clinical social workers, can help people to triage and sort out the relative priority about what needs attention first. Hopefully, a time of many stressful events could be followed by a period of relative calm. If not, we might have to really examine if we actually do have a role in that, such as taking too many risks in life, and we need to settle down to a bit more of a predictable, lower stakes lifestyle. That's not always a bad thing. That can bring peace of mind. Life is not a contest. We don't need to be knocking ourselves out all the time. The new global re-examination of the role of work and standing up to the exploitation of labor worldwide by confronting the oligarchy in countries all over the world is an idea whose time has come. And let's see where that goes. Maybe COVID has taught us that we all need to chill a bit, and life is not all about profits, and we're going to band together and rise up and challenge those who think it is especially at the expense of others. This is the lesson of the new labor movement and the Great Resignation. We all need balance, work and play. Shakespeare said, the web of our life is of a mingled yarn, good and ill together. So maybe we can use our efforts individually and collectively to tip the balance in our favor. For centuries, people have tried to influence their own luck. What they recite, what they do, what they don't do, what they carry around with them in their pocket, all are superstitions that supposedly influence luck. But if we take a secular human approach, we would say that those are perhaps noble, well-intentioned, but ultimately illegitimate attempts. We can prepare as much as we can for what life throws at us, and we can try to jockey for creating opportunity for ourselves, and hopefully that creates luck. Preparation. Fortune favors the bold. So we do want to be bold in our efforts, because other people would say, isn't it interesting how the luckiest people are often the most hardworking? But we still have to balance that with play as well. So maybe we just have to get up each day and say, hope for the best, prepare for the worst, and take what comes with a smile. Wouldn't Dolly Parton do that? If it's good enough for her, it's good enough for me. And to quote the show tune, because I can't ever go too long without quoting a show tune, may your luck be a lady, or maybe just a good power top, tonight. So if you want some help with making your preparation so that you're ready for opportunity and creating your own luck, please consider therapy if you're in California, where I'm licensed to practice therapy, or personal coaching, which is a different animal, but with some areas of personal growth overlap. And I can explain more about those differences between coaching and therapy when we talk, and that's for individuals or couples if we're talking about relationship help. Feel free to email me for more information on my services at Gay Therapy LA. That is emailing at ken@gaytherapyla.com, ken@gaytherapyla.com. Visit the website, gaytherapyla.com/blog, for many blogs that go many years back on various topics. Just search on something in the search box. See what you like. Or you can text me or call me at 310-339-5778. That's 310-339-5778. And I'd be happy to be of help. I'd also love to hear your feedback and your suggestions for future podcast episode topics. And as always, your reviews and comments and sharing with your friends is always appreciated if you're enjoying this. And I hope you are. So, thanks, and I'll see you next time.